Chapter 241, Newt's Visit. Plans remain unchanged, Brioni Island. Daron and the others who had returned set to work dealing with the unconscious Ukrainian Iron Belly and the 23 restrained wizards. Eno didn't ask foolishly about their fate, and Lucius didn't volunteer an answer. Magic did what it could again. Within hours, most of the island's buildings were restored, though the dead acromantulas and much of the vegetation could not be brought back to life. As if determined to smooth the way for Draco, Lucius left 10,000 galleons and departed the island by portkey once everything was settled. Less than an hour later, two weighty visitors arrived. Seeing the white-haired, bearded old man and the man with a shy smile, Eno hurried over. "Long time no see, Mr. Newt?" "You should have told me earlier. I was bored in Devon," Newt snapped, looking around with a flicker of anger. "This is outrageous. Whoever did this had a lot of nerve." Eno gave a brief explanation and then turned to the other man with him, Mr. Flint from LAA Publishing. "Welcome to Mr. Flint. Forgive my haste. After I got word, I contacted Newt straight away, but it seems I was still a step too late," Mr. Flint said. Compared to their last meeting, Eno noticed a change in Mr. Flint. His tone was different, less lofty, more approachable. Seeing that without comment, Eno steered the conversation accordingly. "That you and Mr. Newt could arrive so quickly is the greatest help. No one knows if they'll come back to cause trouble a second time." Newt, blunt as ever, interrupted like a sulky child. "I'm not leaving. Once everything here is settled, let's see who dares to cause trouble again." "I'll stay too. We can talk about the Quidditch World Cup in 3 months," Mr. Flint added. Faced with the two older men, Eno had little choice. "If you're staying, we'll start building houses soon." With Newt and Mr. Flint's high-profile arrival, Brioni Island attracted intense attention. Newt even released statements to several newspapers, declaring the Brioni Island Dragon Sanctuary as a base for his research on magical creatures. Unlike the influence of pureblood elites in Britain, Newt, the magizoologist, enjoyed a worldwide reputation. The press coverage made it clear the island was now under the watchful eye of the international wizarding community. No one would dare cause trouble again. In peaceful times, the first to break the rules usually end up facing the backlash alone. By mid-May, more than 10 days had passed since the incident. Mr. Flint departed on the 7th day, and with him gone, Eno relaxed and talked with Newt with ease, even broaching subjects like boggarts and nightmares. The conversation felt as comfortable and casual as their last summer holiday in the American manor. By the coast of Brioni, in the cool shade of trees, 2 lounge chairs sat side by side. Newt lay back, eyes closed, feeling the sea breeze. "Have you changed your mind?" he asked quietly. "Are all masters of magical creatures this perceptive?" Eno replied. Newt opened his eyes. "Really? You've changed your mind?" "I'm hesitating," Eno admitted. "During the Christmas holiday, I met someone who told me things about fire. Prometheus's words have always hung over me. The birth of a phoenix defines fire. He suggested that fire is just fire, and maybe forcing fire to give birth to a phoenix isn't the right choice." The 2 men beneath the trees fell silent. Time drifted by. At last Newt spoke. "I respect your choice. Honestly, Feed's birth has already satisfied my curiosity." "You're not going to try to persuade me?" Eno said, a little disappointed. A living public phoenix appearing under one's care. How could any wizard refuse? Newt shook his head. "How could I persuade you? If I tell you to give up, you'll resent me. If I tell you to go ahead, you'll hesitate. Some things only the person involved can decide. When someone is indecisive, advice can do more harm than good." "Then let's leave it to fate," Eno said, and took a wooden die from his pocket, turning it over in his hand. "Fate?" Newt's interest was piqued. "I've heard you have a knack for divination." "I'm not divining this time, just rolling the dice," Eno said. At the Black Old House, he'd talked divination with Dumbledore and had tried to avoid relying on omens for his own life. A diviner who depends entirely on divination becomes its slave. "Okay, how will it work?" Newt asked. "In the simplest way, 1, 2, or 3 means give up. 4, 5, or 6 means proceed as planned." Eno cleared his mind so as not to influence the roll, tossed the die into the air, and watched it tumble back down like any muggle die obeying gravity. "It seems the answer is clear," Newt said with a smile that held relief. "Then it's settled, according to the plan." Eno didn't hesitate this time. Immediately, he felt lighter, as if a match had been struck in a dark room, briefly illuminating everything, then leaving the darkness, but leaving him changed. "According to the plan," Newt repeated. "And not just you and Dumbledore. We should invite a lot of people to come along." Eno felt a flicker of excitement at the thought. If Death Eaters really showed up, it would be a spectacle. Newt and Dumbledore together would be formidable. Even Lord Voldemort, at his height, might have found them troublesome. Chapter 242, Hogwarts before summer vacation late May. Eno left Briony Island. It wasn't that he wanted to, but a letter from Hogwarts had forced him to return. The sender was Snape, and the message was curt, just 5 words: return for the exam. Faced with the head of Slytherin's terse command, Eno bade Newt farewell and left instructions with Darren to keep the spider farm running. Back at Hogwarts, Eno went straight to the potions classroom office, an official way to mark the end of his 2.5-month leave. "Professor, thank you for permitting this. Everything's in order now," he reported. "No need to tell me," Snape said in his habitual flat tone. Having worked with the professor for 3 years, Eno understood him well and didn't press further. After the brief exchange, he left the office. Returning to the Slytherin common room 2.5 months later felt like coming home. The furniture, the atmosphere, all familiar. The only unfamiliar thing was a moving picture mirror on a shelf, which was showing a duel between a good-natured Goyle and Ron Weasley. Oddly enough, the Slytherin and Gryffindor students were sharing the same stage. More oddly still, Ron was taking a beating, and taking it badly. In the mirror, his stumbling and exaggerated wails looked theatrically fake to anyone watching, which only made the scene more ridiculous. Over in the Gryffindor common room, Fred and George had just tossed a bag across to Ron, who eagerly opened it. 1, 2, 3. "No need to count," George said, raised an eyebrow. 30 sickles exactly. Your payment won't be short." Ron laughed stupidly. 30 sickles, almost 2 galleons, was more money than he'd ever had at one time. He stared at the shiny coins spread on the table and swallowed. Fred noticed the look on his brother's face, and for the first time felt a twinge of guilt about tricking their gullible younger brother. But there was no taking it back. Malfoy had paid 10 galleons for Ron to pretend to be beaten by Goyle. Maybe it was the twins' knack for reading each other. Fred gave George a look, and they slipped out together. Left alone, Ron kept counting the coins with a grin. Knowing how much you've been given is one thing. Feeling the weight and counting it yourself is another. "I don't think it's that simple," Harry said, nudging him. "Think, Ron, what really happened?" "It's nothing," Ron waved off. "They wouldn't do anything too much. It was just a prank." He shrugged. George and Fred wouldn't cross a line, he knew that. Besides, the pay was good, and he'd be in the moving picture mirror. Earning money by acting a bit foolish didn't shame him. He'd make a few galleons before summer and maybe even afford a new broom. "Who else was there?" Harry pressed. "I just get a weird feeling about it." "Malfoy, of course," Ron said. "Wouldn't be George and Fred being so generous otherwise. They made a tidy profit from it, and they filmed it for the mirror. What's the big deal?" Harry fell quiet. Of course he knew the routine. There wasn't much more he could say. He had half a mind to get a moving picture mirror of his own from Eno and make his own films in Gryffindor rather than let Malfoy profit. But Eno hadn't been seen for over 2 months, and all of that would have to wait. For the first time that evening, Harry realized that one day he might miss a boy he cared about. "Achoo!" A crisp sneeze echoed through the library. Eno rubbed his sore nose and gave Madame Pince an apologetic smile. After watching Ron's performance in the common room, he had come to the library to study. With final exams 2 weeks away, his practical skills were fine, but he needed to review theory. If his grades slipped, it wouldn't just be his honor at stake. Snape's reputation would take heat, and there'd be whispers among the staff. He also wanted to warn Lena, the White Witch, that the countdown to the term's end had begun. The library would close for the summer, and the sanctuary's pattern suggested another opening to fantasy worlds was likely. Lena, having helped him as much as Professor Hans had, couldn't be kept as a pet. While the rules prevented severing their bond, he intended to grant her the greatest freedom the rules allowed, freedom he hoped would be meaningful whether she went to Middle-earth or the Arad continent. With those goals in mind, Eno stayed in the library until 7 in the evening. As the stacks emptied, he strolled past the restricted section. A nimble blue acromantula clambered up his sleeve and settled into his robe. Before he left, Madame Pince peered at him and asked, suspiciously concerned, "It's almost exam time, and you're not borrowing any books? Next week you won't be able to take anything out." Eno smiled, gave a little shake to free the spider from his cuff, and replied, "Thank you, but I have a better source." Lena had spent a whole school year in the restricted section. With what she'd collected, there was no need to borrow anything more. Today's entry, Horklump, British Ministry of Magic, Classification Level X, Origin and Distribution. The Horklump is native to Scandinavia, but is now widespread throughout Northern Europe. Appearance: the Horklump is a fleshy, pink, mushroom-like creature covered with sparse, stiff black bristles. Habit: rather than roots, the Horklump extends strong, powerful tentacles into the soil to search for its preferred food, earthworms. Chapter 243. It really became a nightmare. In the Scottish Highlands in early June, the days were unseasonably warm. As final exams approached, Hogwarts itself had taken on a restless edge. The tension was most obvious among the 5th and 7th year students. Two sets of exams that did more than measure grades. They shaped futures. But the anxious atmosphere that gripped much of the castle seemed to pass over Slytherin House. Most of the snakes already had their paths mapped out long before they sat their OWLs or NEUTs. To them, the exams were formalities, hurdles for others. Even Goyle, who would inherit the family business, treated school more like a long holiday, with the side hobby of critiquing Hogwarts kitchens. The four houses always looked different, and that difference was on full display in the Slytherin dormitory. In the quiet common room, the only sounds were the rustle of pages and the scratch of quills. "Rena, I still think Middle-earth is the best option. I've told you the story already, but the choice is yours," Eno said, sweeping his gaze over a handful of handwritten books scattered on the table. The titles alone were enough to unsettle anyone. Shred Your Brains, One Finger Bruise Potion, 12 Uses for Eyeballs, Techniques of the Killing Curse. "You don't need to worry about me. I've already chosen the location," Rena replied, voice clear and cool. "These are the ones I filtered out. This is the only help I'm offering." "Put them aside," Eno insisted. Choosing a place is important. He knew how hard some choices were to undo, especially with time differences between worlds. A single decision might mean decades before a second chance. "There's nothing to choose. It's about experiencing life again. Besides, I'm already grateful. Since I woke in Narnia, all I've encountered is malice and rejection." Rena moved, her 8 legs lifting her lightly onto the table. "Living again is something I never expected. For that, I have you to thank." "But you're still not free," Eno said, the first time he had brought it up directly. He'd avoided the subject before. The sanctuary's mechanism that bound Rena to him gave him control, absolute enough that he had felt guilty about it. The dorm fell quiet under the weight of the admission. Time ticked by in silence until Rena broke it. "So, will you force me?" she asked. "Of course not," Eno said without hesitation. "If I wanted to force you, why would I call you unfree, little one?" Rena gave a small chuckle. Though she sat in the form of an acromantula, in that tone she was again a legendary witch. The name she used for him pulled long-buried memories from Eno: the reindeer sleigh, the dwarf Simon, the castle on the ice plain, the ice sculptures in the Great Hall. "Yes, you are free." Eno's voice was unusually firm. Saying it felt like unburdening himself. Rena didn't bristle at the reminder. Instead, she shifted the conversation. "I don't know how long I'll have. Ask anything while you can. This world feels very strange to me." More than strange, Eno had known for a while. The magical world was high-end and clouded with mystery, like the sanctuary's smoke, beautiful and opaque, hiding fundamentals he had no desire to pry at obsessively. He no longer chased truth the way Madame Ravenclaw might. Maybe the disguise fate had given him, the bard persona, had softened his edges. He'd become someone who sought almost rather than absolute answers. Still, since Rena had opened the door, he wouldn't let the moment pass. "If I have one question, it's this," he said, and with that he drew forth the boggart he had kept hidden in the shadows. A mass of dense black mist uncoiled and pooled on the table. "Hogwarts keeps no real secrets, but it is full of them," Eno said. Safety and privacy of dorms are paramount, but weird things happen. He looked around the Slytherin dormitory, emerald green panels, candlelight flickering in the gloom, and then back to the eight-legged witch and the curling smoke. The sanctuary's mechanism let me accidentally take control of this boggart, and the second magical outburst changed it. In the black mist, he told Rena everything that had happened over the last year, without omission. There was no need to hide anything. They were, in a way, beads on the same string, and that string couldn't be severed. When he finished, he expected silence. Instead, Rena, without hesitation, offered her own take. There's nothing supernatural about that change by itself, she said. You believed the connection between the boggart and nightmares. Your belief is half the spell. That on its own isn't enough to explain the whole thing. Rena reached out and stirred the smoke with a light, precise movement of her legs. Her voice remained steady and cold as ever. The core of it is the magical outburst. I have always respected this world for that. During an outburst, even children who have never learned magic can do things the most powerful wizards cannot. When emotions run high, those impulses can actually become reality, but they're uncontrollable. They only fulfill what the child secretly wants, whether that's a slice of cake or to make themselves fly. As she spoke, Eno's understanding sharpened. He thought of 11-year-old Harry at the zoo, who, without words or a wand, made the glass vanish for the Brazilian boa constrictor. That example had always been ironclad proof of the outburst's raw, wish-fulfilling power. The second magical surge, Rena suggested, had been triggered through the boggart. Eno's deep-seated belief that the boggart was allied to nightmares supplied the wish. Under that almost granted power, everything the boggart touched changed in kind. Chapter 244, 150 Magical Miracles. In the Slytherin dormitory, the dark, thick fog slowly thinned. As if sentient, it slipped back into shadowy corners and clumps. The wizard's second magic riot produced countless miracles that cannot be replicated, and this is only the beginning, one voice intoned. When Eno took it all in, he sighed from the depths of his chest. 150 chocolate frog cards. This wasn't some childish collector's game. These were 150 singular magical phenomena. The terrifying Oglaf, the invincible Andros, Archibald Alderton, who accidentally blew an entire village away while trying to bake a cake. Each name marked an utterly unique, unrepeatable miracle. At the same time, it was proof of how uncontrollable the magic riot was. Thoughts raced through Eno's mind. He thought of Parseltongue, of Nicholas and the Philosopher's Stone, of the Four Founders, and of Merlin. Whether black or white, good or evil, these wizards whose names were carved into the history of magic ultimately became fleeting, unreplicable miracles. At the same time, Lena made her request. If you already know the answer, please send me back now, if it's convenient. I want to spend the rest of my time with that flower. Of course, Eno said without hesitation. It's completely different inside now. You wouldn't even recognize it. They've added a valley to the east. He knew Lena couldn't get back to the sanctuary on her own, nor could Feed or the boggart. Though connected, none of them had unrestricted permission to enter and leave. With that in mind, Eno gently took Lena's foot in one hand, his other hand resting on the 5 or 6 handwritten spellbooks on the table. Then, with a quiet disappearance, the dormitory fell silent again. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the castle, in the Gryffindor 5th-year dormitory, George and Fred sat secretly on a bed, a large pile of loose coins scattered between them. Most were copper nuts and silver sickles, but there were a fair number of galleons mixed in. "How much do you think we'll need?" George asked, eyeing the money. It was their entire income for 3 years. "I don't know, but it won't be cheap, I imagine," Fred replied. With Eno back, the twins had decided to buy a film mirror. Their plan was simple: modify it based on the original, then package and sell it. They hadn't been filming with Malfoy to make money. They'd been studying the mirror's strengths and flaws up close. Their observations paid off. When not playing footage, the film mirror was just an ordinary, uninspired mirror. But the dressing mirror at the Burrow not only found fault, but could curse at people. An idea was born. Let the mirror evaluate the mirror. Strip the Burrow mirror's personality functions and graft them onto the film mirror. Then, while showing footage, the mirror itself could comment, praise, criticize, or even swear. It would be brilliant. Now the only question was how much a film mirror would cost. Altogether, we only have 24 galleons and 13 sickles, George said, spreading his hands helplessly. He knew it wasn't enough. What about the straw rings? And there's still 3 galleons for the jumping and frolicking payment at the end of the month, right? Fred added, then shook his head. Those extras still wouldn't be enough. Just as they were stumped, another voice cut through the dormitory. Jordan Lee watched the twins with amusement. Their usual quickness seemed to have deserted them. They looked like ordinary tailless swallowtail dogs. Why buy one yourselves? Partnerships and shared profits are the right way. Besides, I don't think you can afford one. Like Muggle televisions, they're very expensive. Jordan's analysis was practical. The film mirror's first appearance in the Great Hall had surprised him, but only briefly. It was basically a wizarding television. Many young wizards from Muggle families felt the same. Hearing Jordan, George and Fred suddenly brightened, recognizing the obvious. They saw foolishness in each other's eyes. I told you we shouldn't spend so much time with Ron. You're right, a foolish younger brother might make money, but you need to keep your distance. They teased one another, but neither really meant Ron. Their reluctance sprang from too much time spent with Malfoy. With Jordan's suggestion, the twins realized Malfoy was only a courier, a free runner who didn't ask for money. Decision made, they gathered the loose change and left the dormitory. Similar scenes played out across the houses. Everyone wanted one of the interesting new devices. Before, without the inventor present, ideas had to be shelved. Now, with Eno returned, minds were made up. In the Ravenclaw Tower, Cho Chang was surrounded by a cluster of students. As the house's darling and their Quidditch seeker, Cho, both beautiful and talented, never lacked attention, but at this moment she was mostly encircled by girls. Ravenclaw, since Rowena's day, had always prized numbers of females, and British Ravenclaw girls were never in short supply of brains. Yet the usual calm, noble Ravenclaws had been transformed into a chattering swarm, each eager to make her own point. We should film an opera, a love story, a really tear-jerking one. We should record educational content like the bookshelves in the common room. Put the mirror there so future first years can study from it. Stop. Your endless chatter is like a horklump. A tremendously loud voice boomed through the tower. Everyone instinctively covered their ears. After a brief, stunned silence, the girls turned angrily toward the source. In the entire castle, and perhaps the entire British wizarding world, no one had ever dared to provoke a Ravenclaw girl so brazenly. Chapter 45, The Addition of Twins, Penelope Clearwater, 7th-year prefect of Ravenclaw and chairwoman of the Hogwarts Student Council. Surrounded by angry faces in the common room, she calmly lowered the wand she had been holding to her throat. Well, does anyone have anything to say? I'm waiting. By her 7th year, Penelope had become a truly mature witch. Her tall frame and the authority she had earned, serving as a prefect for the last 3 years, made people look away instinctively. Nobody wanted to meet that steady gaze head-on. I'm genuinely curious, what exactly are your arguments based on? Her eyes swept the room like a hawk scanning the plains. She didn't linger on any one person. All of your arguments assume Eno Swinburne will be willing to sell you a film mirror. All your hopes hinge on Cho's friendship with Swinburne, and that friendship exists only because they're in the same club. Use your brains. The person in question is Eno Swinburne, not Cedric Diggory. Penelope's words left everyone mute, and Cho flushed painfully. She covered her forehead helplessly. What did any of this have to do with her? Why make comparisons, if it were up to her? But this wasn't the time to argue. Noticing Cho's discomfort, Penelope softened her expression and offered a quick apology. Now, anyone who wants to speak or contribute, take out your galleons and register with me. As she spoke, a scrap of parchment and a quill rose and hovered in the air. Rest assured, all funds will be open and transparent. A very similar scene was unfolding in Hufflepuff, except that Cedric was the center of attention there. Eno, however, was oblivious. Back in Sanctuary Valley, after watering the magical plants with a weather charm, he carried the books Lena had copied into the white marble study. He glanced at the empty shelves and felt no disappointment, only pride. There were only a few volumes, but their worth was extraordinary. Time Reversal, Resurrection of the Dead, the Book of Invisibility, the Gaunt family notes, the Half-Blood Prince's potion techniques, and his own basilisk leather notebooks containing alchemical formulas for items like Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket, and the Time Turner. Now 6 books Lena had copied from the restricted section had joined the collection. "I feel richer by the day," Eno said, running a hand along the bookshelf with satisfaction. "You're only rich if you understand them," Lena called from the blue spiderweb she hung from on the ceiling, poking her head out with a teasing tone. "Otherwise, this wealth is just being stored for you." Eno wasn't bothered in the least. The existence of Sanctuary alone, by the most conservative estimates, would grant him more than twice the normal wizard's lifespan. Before dinner, he left the valley. At the entrance to the Great Hall, he saw the Weasley twins watching him from a distance, and Cho standing off to one side, looking hesitant. He chose Cho without hesitation, not out of any deep calculation, but because his friendship with her was the more solid. George and Fred both put on exaggerated, wounded expressions. Eno ignored them and quickened his steps. "If I'm not mistaken, the Flower of Ravenclaw has been waiting for me. Truly I'm honored," he teased. "You're infuriating," Cho shot back with an exasperated look. Once, she had actually waited for him like that and had gotten nothing in reply. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Eno got straight to the point. He had already noticed several Hufflepuffs slipping away from the Great Hall. "On behalf of Ravenclaw, I'd like to buy a film mirror." Cho didn't hesitate either. She produced a pouch stamped with the Gringotts emblem and set it on the table. "Here, 220 galleons. If that's not enough, tell me how much more you need. Say it plainly. Only a small portion of this is mine anyway." Eno inwardly admired Cho's practical, rational way of thinking. Who said all Ravenclaws were just bookish types? "I'll give you one," he said. "Don't rush to refuse. Listen to me first. This is a promotional measure." Smart people recognize strategy, and Cho understood exactly what he meant. Her dark eyes shone with quiet admiration. "Then I'll wait. Same time, same place tomorrow," she said clearly, as if determined not to leave until the matter was settled. Considering how rumors could spread, neither of them lingered in the crowded, watchful Great Hall longer than necessary. Cho left briskly. Eno never even sat down to eat. Just then, Fred and George materialized on either side of him like clockwork. "Say what you need to say quick. My stomach is starting to complain," George said. Facing the two he admired most, Eno was indulgent. "Keep it short." Fred went first. "We want to collaborate with you. Well, there's an idea we want to run past you." "Tell me," Eno said. The twins' ideas rarely disappointed. "Our family has a talking dressing mirror," George began. 5 minutes later, Eno understood where they were going and felt a rush of excitement. A magical version of film criticism, a talking mirror that roasted and reviewed. It would be brilliant. "I like it. It's a great idea," he agreed. "So we'd like to buy a mirror and invite you to visit the borough this summer to see our 2 joke shops," Fred added, shooting George a look. The twins extended their invitation, and Eno accepted. "I'll write before I come. If it's inconvenient, you two can come to Hogsmeade instead." He didn't refuse their invitation. Visiting the borough could count as a magical dream fulfilled. But he returned to his previous point. "I'll give you the mirror. Don't refuse. Hear me out first." He explained the concept again and shared his own thinking. "What the wizarding world lacks is not quality, but quantity. We need industrialization, mass production, distribution. Muggle assembly line ideas could help popularize these products." Industrialization, quantity. George and Fred both looked puzzled. "Yes, we don't lack high-end alchemical devices. What we lack is popularization," Eno said. He went on to explain assembly lines and production on a scale the twins could understand. Their faces gradually brightened as they imagined how a talking mirror could become a household phenomenon. Xiao share for today Clabbert, British Ministry of Magic, Classification Level XX, Origin and Distribution. Native to the southern United States, Clabberts have since been exported worldwide. Appearance. The Clabbert resembles a cross between a monkey and a frog. It has smooth, green, mottled, hairless skin, webbed hands and feet, and long, flexible limbs that allow it to swing through branches like an ape. Chapter 246, Arrangements Before Leaving School. Wizards are an unusually mysterious lot. How mysterious? They attend the same schools, read the same books, sit under the same professors, and still their magic differs wildly. A simple example: what Hermione knows, Harry doesn't. What Harry knows, Ron doesn't. And what Dumbledore knows, no one else does. Wizards never chased industrialization the way Muggles did. Only two trades ever reached anything like mass production: newspapers and sweets. Think chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. In the Great Hall, more than a month earlier, Eno had already been thinking about the future of the film mirror and what to do with it. Given current technical limits, real-time broadcasting like radio or television was impossible. The only viable path was to slash costs and make the mirrors consumable rather than a luxury. If the price could be brought down, bundled sales would help move volume. Fred and George Weasley had been trying to stay quiet during the conversation, not wanting to interrupt, but when bundled sales were mentioned, George couldn't help but speak up. The Daily Prophet won't agree to that. A newspaper that sells for 2 nuts can't pay for a film mirror. They won't agree. Fred nodded seriously. The Prophet's a complicated beast. Eno didn't argue. He let the point stand for a moment and steered the discussion elsewhere. Set the newspapers aside for now. We need to focus on lowering costs and getting to mass production. I happen to have a small island in Croatia, George said with a grin, but we can talk about that after the holidays. Right now, I'm starving. Dinner had a set time at Hogwarts, and as the conversation wound down, the Great Hall thinned out. The twins knew when to stop. They'd already sorted their summer plans and didn't need to push the subject further. Days passed slowly. A week before exams, the castle fell briefly under a filming craze. Every house wanted a film mirror, and even one per house sent enthusiasm spreading. Professors, however, quickly stamped it out. If students let themselves be distracted before finals, the new amusement had no place to be. With the staff's intervention, the castle returned to its usual tense study atmosphere. Outside the castle, the broad greens were calm. Bored and looking for an escape from the general restlessness, Eno went to Hagrid's hut. He lounged on the lone sofa, sipping butterbeer. "Hagrid, are you staying at Hogwarts over the summer?" he asked, curious if Hagrid's role was mostly professor or gamekeeper. "Yeah, I'm staying," Hagrid replied, setting his 2 cans on the table and collapsing into a heavy chair. "I've got a bit of freedom, mind. If I plan ahead, I can be off for a few days now and then." Even so, Hagrid never really expected to leave for long. After raising the new Acromantula brood, he couldn't abandon the little hairy creatures. Eno understood that completely and wanted to make a proper arrangement. "Hagrid, I'd like to invite you to be my guest during the summer holidays." "Of course, no problem." Hagrid interrupted at once. "I heard you bought a house in Hogsmeade." No, it's in Croatia," Eno corrected, keeping it short. He explained his plan: move the Acromantulas to a dragon sanctuary on a private island to avoid upsetting the balance of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid went silent for a beat. Even with his beard hiding his face, the shock in his voice came through. "An island? A dragon sanctuary? Moving Acromantulas?" "Something like that," Eno said. "That way we won't have to hide them anymore." He tapped the table lightly. A faint frost formed on the 2 butterbeer cans, and he popped one open. Chilled butterbeer in June tasted perfectly refreshing as it slid down his throat. Hagrid blinked and recovered his enthusiasm. A private island, far from England, meant freedom, a sacred sort of privacy. Even if something happened and an investigation was needed, only the Ministry of Magic would have jurisdiction. "I'll write with the details during the holidays," Eno added, "but you can start getting ready now." They talked for a while. By the time they looked up, the late afternoon sky outside had darkened. Life, like the weather, has sunny days, cloudy days, and the occasional storm. No one can avoid that cycle. The last day before the summer departure was one of nostalgia. Graduating students, Percy, Penelope, and others, walked the halls with heavy hearts. The library doors, the moving staircases, the portraits in the corridors, the common room furnishings, everything seemed suddenly precious after 7 years. That evening, Eno was intercepted one more time, but this visit came to the Slytherin common room. Percy and Penelope, the male and female head students, entered with the confident air their shining badges gave them. Eno looked at the pair, and after a moment's thought, agreed to their request. "I can provide 4 film mirrors," he said. "One for each house's graduation commemoration. It isn't about money, I just don't have a big stock right now." Percy and Penelope exchanged a quick, grateful glance. "Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. 4 will be more than enough," Percy said formally. "It's fine," Eno waved off the thanks. "I understand that sentimentality, and there's good news. Film mirrors should be available in Diagon Alley by the summer, so making copies for your commemorations shouldn't be a problem then." Even if they hadn't come, he'd planned a Slytherin graduation banquet and to take commemorative recordings. Their visit simply saved him the trouble. Chapter 247. Nothing has changed. Everything is changing. In mid-June, the evening breeze had a faint coolness. Eno carried a suitcase and walked alone along the winding flagstone path from the castle toward Hogsmeade. It was only a half-hour walk, but he deliberately stretched it into more than an hour. There was no particular reason, he just wanted to slow down. Life and time were both moving too quickly. Perhaps the true luxury was simply to decelerate. Approaching Hogsmeade, the air smelled of sweets and fresh herbs. Honeydukes must be testing new treats again. The main street's shops were cheerful and bright, display windows full of magical trinkets and fashionable goods. Even though they were open for business, the shops lacked Diagon Alley's frantic energy. They felt more like quiet village stores. Maybe that's why people loved Hogsmeade. Peace amid bustle, calm amid noise. Eno walked slowly back to his cottage. Since connecting it to the Flu network, he'd given the place a cozy name for convenience, a little country house to call home. He pushed open the front door and went straight upstairs to his room. After a few cleaning charms, everything looked refreshed. He opened the window and let the last glow of sunset spill in. By the window, Eno sank back into a reclining chair and casually opened the restricted section book Lena had transcribed, Techniques of the Killing Curse. Simple, efficient, a single strike to kill. The Killing Curse, the ultimate dark curse in the world's eyes, was unique, more a deterrent than a duel spell. He'd long wanted to understand it, but rules and oversight in the castle had always kept him from delving into the most dangerous restricted tomes. Now things were easier. Thanks to Lena, many dangerous seals no longer applied to him. Time drifted on. On the 3rd day of the holiday, after 2 days of rest and shopping, Eno had stocked a great deal of supplies and even tucked Fide into his suitcase for the journey. Based on past experience, it was nearly time to slip into another fantasy story, and whatever world opened next, having a phoenix would save a lot of trouble. At dawn on the 4th day, he woke with a start, grabbed the suitcase from beneath the bed, and in an instant, he was gone from the room. Middle-earth. 3rd age 315. The Shire. Bilbo was bored, sitting in Bag End and puffing his pipe. The ring had been taken by his nephew Frodo, and Gandalf had departed with him. The adventures of his youth had left him with that ring, and almost 100 years had passed. "It's good it's gone. Everything here was always meant for Frodo," Bilbo muttered, taking a long pull of the rich Shire tobacco and letting it dull his worries for a moment. Bang! 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 An impatient knock shattered the quiet. "Don't bother me. I've told you already. Don't invite me to parties. Don't trouble me. You're not welcome," Bilbo snapped. For years, he preferred to shut himself in Bag End, living almost like a recluse rather than making new acquaintances. Over a century, he'd seen too many friends and relatives pass. He'd had enough of farewells. But the knocking continued, insistent as ever. "Barrel riding thief. Are you going to open the door or not? If not, I'm off." Hearing that familiar name and familiar voice, Bilbo didn't even notice his pipe slipping from his hand. He sprang from his chair and moved to the door with surprising speed for his age. He opened it, and the face at the threshold merged with a memory so deep his eyes grew wet. "My old friend, I've missed you. Far too long, far too long." Eno had returned to the Shire, to Bag End, after 45 years. "I've missed you too. I'm back, and I've brought fireworks and new stories." The Shire was peace itself under the night sky, a gentle breeze like the one that had blown the night he left. Candlelight warmed Bag End's interior as Bilbo sat in his chair, wrinkled face alight with joy. "You don't know what's been going on all these years, do you? Ever since you went, everyone's called Gandalf a clumsy fireworks maker, because his fireworks—" Bilbo broke off with a fit of coughing. "Reparo!" Eno waved his wand, and 2 sealed bottles of grass juice appeared from the suitcase. "Old fellow, slow down." He opened one bottle and handed it over, patting Bilbo's back. "Drink. Don't rush. Truly, don't rush." "I'm not rushing. I'm just too happy," Bilbo insisted, drinking the grass juice as he tried to catch his breath. As the color returned to his face, Eno asked what he'd come to ask. "Grandma Julia." "Never mind. Where's Lily?" "When I arrived, her old room seemed empty." Bilbo sighed. "What happened to her?" Eno asked quietly, but a sharpness flickered in his eyes and Bilbo noticed. "Don't worry. Lily is fine. She just doesn't live in the Shire anymore." Bilbo spoke quickly and finally explained the reason for his sigh. "The second year after you left, Grandma Julia didn't make it through the winter. Lily and I buried her beneath a grapevine." For a moment Bag End fell silent. In the candle's faint flame, Eno seemed to see that memory vividly. A frail old woman, one hand on an oil lamp, the other holding young Lily's hand, standing quietly in the outer district of Minas Tirith. Time had kept moving, minute by minute. Bilbo broke the hush. "You should try to accept it. Grandma Julia was very old." No one knew loss better than Bilbo. He had seen far too much in his long years. Decades had passed since they had last met. Bilbo talked without stopping, dusk into deep night, night into dawn, until at last he could not keep his eyes open and drifted off in mid-conversation. Eno used a levitation charm to lift him gently and lay him in bed, then stepped out of Bag End. It was a clear, starlit night in the Shire. Moonlight washed the hills in silver. Eno walked past a grapevine as thick as a bowl and came to a lone mound of earth. Tough plantain grew over it. They clung stubbornly to the soil, their small white flowers nodding in the night breeze. The movement was not joyful. There was a hint of sadness to it, as if they remembered things better left unspoken. "Grandma Julia," he said softly, "I'm back. The oil lamp lit my way home." Time had been merciless. Eno sat before the mound, sometimes speaking into the darkness, sometimes simply listening. He did not return to Bag End until pale dawn lit the eastern sky. Bilbo slept soundly. Eno did not wake him. Instead, he went to the guest room next door. Much had changed, and much had not. Lily, the frail little girl Bilbo had once known, was now the mother of 3, living in a human village not far from the Shire. Bilbo said she might become a grandmother next year. He had no intention of announcing himself. He would visit in secret, unseen. Some memories that time has smoothed need not be sharpened again. Clarity can often bring pain. In the guest room, Eno opened his suitcase. Blue and black gleams spilled out. The ink-black boggart melted into his shadow, while Fide, small and merry, hopped up on the wooden beams of Bag End as if it owned the place. Eno paid them little heed and set his attention on the tabletop. "It's the Third Age, 3015, he murmured. "Frodo has already set off with the One Ring. I'm not sure how long I'll stay, but some things will need planning." Lena had shrunk herself to 3 inches, an acromantula no larger than a trinket, and perched nearby, looking oddly charming. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Not me," Eno said, a little helpless. You. You need to leave your kin somewhere," he went on. "This place can hold us, but your acromantula relatives will need a foothold. You'll need some capital left behind." Middle-earth could accommodate outsiders. It was vast and more than the familiar map of Eriador and Gondor. Whether Aman in the west or distant lands to the east, there were realms enough for more than hobbits and wizards. Lena waved the concern off. "You worry too much," she said. "I'll manage. Don't fuss over me. Do what you have to do." He couldn't argue. Lena was no foolish child. She had read in the restricted section of Hogwarts for a year. She understood how to arrange for herself. Eno let the matter drop. There were, however, other hard choices. How long should he stay? On paper, Frodo left the Shire, and the Fellowship's march seemed swift, but in truth, the events stretched over years. The saga did not close until the Third Age, 3021. Eno reviewed the timeline and felt the familiar helplessness. He could not do much just yet. He'd thought once to take part in the defense at Helm's Deep in 3019. It appealed to him not merely for his friendship with the young Theoden, but because he wanted to shape the tone of this world. If he had power and did nothing while orcs slaughtered, what had he become? Small omissions led to larger compromises. He imagined the path of a wizard who simply stood aside and told himself he could not interfere. It chilled him. "Do you already have a plan?" Lena asked when she noticed the change in his expression. I do, he said. I'll stay quietly for a while. If I decide to remain through the end of the story, then I'll be at Helm's Deep when the time comes. Wizards shouldn't only be there to swing a sword at close quarters. If I fight, I'll fight as I am. There was another motive threaded through the decision. Gandalf. If Eno could win the old gray wizard's favor, it might smooth matters for Lena as well. Lena's tone did not change. I thought you'd go straight to Rohan and rescue that king you once photographed, she said dryly. Go toe-to-toe with Saruman? Eno looked up. I know more of the dark arts than pure white magic at the moment. Beyond a Patronus, I don't see a straightforward way to break Saruman's enchantment. Besides, the story's arc already had a remedy. Gandalf would come to Theoden's aid. The worst of the enchantment was the dismissal of soldiers, severe for a horse lord people, but not a catastrophe to be solved by a lone, ill-prepared wizard. If things turned sour, there was always the fallback he'd mentioned earlier, switch worlds. It was a small comfort, but a real one. Bilbo slept through these plans, but he dreamed of Eno. In his dream, the old human wizard who had once saved his life came to visit again. After 45 years, the other man looked the same as when he left, perhaps a touch taller, but unchanged otherwise. Bilbo's eyes opened into that remembering grin. Outside the room, a familiar voice called, impatient but warm. Wake up when you're done sleeping. You haven't told me Lily's address yet. Bilbo laughed and bounded from the bed with the nimbleness of a hobbit half his age. This wasn't a dream, he cried. I'll take you there in a bit. We'll go together. Oh, and I want to see her 3 children. Middle-earth had folded him back into its story. For Bilbo, for Eno, this was both a beginning and, in its way, a nearing of the tale's end. Chapter 49. The hero is old. The team is growing. Middle-earth. Third Age, 3018. In peaceful times, time easily slips by. Eno had been living quietly in the Shire for 3 years. After the first year, he was convinced he'd hit the jackpot and would most likely stay until the story ended before returning. 7 years of story time, luxury beyond reason. Reading, farming, and studying alchemy and magic became his whole life. There were still interludes, organizing the Shire's fireworks at the annual party, visiting Lily with Bilbo. When he visited Lily, he never showed himself openly. He slipped on a disillusionment charm, watched from a distance, and left a few alchemical amulets. Lily, in middle age now, bore a few hints of Grandma Julia, but she was happier than Julia had been. A loving husband, 3 grown children with families of their own, and a newborn grandson. In a green meadow in the Shire, a young man in a linen robe appeared. At least 6 feet tall, his dark hair caught a faint blue sheen in the sunlight. His features were sharp and sculpted, his face almost elven, except for the lack of pointed ears. Eno had entered Middle-earth at 15. 3 years later, he was 18. For a time, he had even possessed the physique of an adult wizard, briefly, because everything would revert when the story ended. Physical changes, the wear of time, would all disappear once the narrative closed. Aguamenti, Eno called, flicking his wand. A thick jet of water shot upward and did not fall. Instead, it hung in the air, gathering into a 10-foot diameter sphere. The sphere rotated slowly, as if guided by an invisible hand, and fine droplets sprinkled down across the field, producing an artificial rain. The water-making charm, a levitation charm, and elemental transfiguration linked together flawlessly. When the task was done, Eno's form vanished again. 3 years of settling in had let his magic grow considerably and had given him the chance to organize the knowledge he'd gathered before. He had time to learn, to practice, and to become patient. After lunch, Bilbo filled 2 pipes with practiced fingers. Try this one of mine, he said with pride. It's been aging nearly 100 years. Eno took the pipe but didn't light it. From his trunk, he pulled a dust-covered box. This is... Bilbo's eyes softened with recognition. That's the tobacco you traded me for a plate of candy and cheese, he said. Eno opened the box. Inside was the tobacco he'd swapped with Bilbo in Beorn's hall on his first visit to Middle-earth. Bilbo reached for it with a trembling hand and refilled his pipe. A match flared, a soft hiss, and the two sat puffing in the warm silence. The mellow smoke made Eno close his eyes. Over the past year, he'd been slowly absorbed into Bilbo's life. He'd grown fond of Shire tobacco. Time drifted. When the smoke thinned, Bilbo spoke quietly, half to himself. "Old friend, are you leaving?" Before Eno could answer, Bilbo continued, brooding. "Don't try to fool me. I'm glad you're willing to stay so long. They always come and go in a hurry. Even Gandalf doesn't stay for more than a few days." Bilbo's voice was aged but calm. Beneath it there was the echo of a hero in decline. Was Bilbo a hero? Without question. He had resisted the pull of the One Ring, and more than that, had faced Smaug, no tame, farmed dragon, but an adversary on the kind of scale that pits one against beings like Gandalf and the Balrog. Time is merciless. Heroes grow old. The once bold hobbit adventurer was now an elder who sometimes choked on a puff of tobacco. Bilbo rocked in his chair, his voice trailing, until finally a soft snore escaped him. Under an azure sky and over wide green plains, a black horse moved with poise. The kingdom of Rohan, people of the horse, stood out in Middle-earth. Unlike Gondor with Númenórean blood, the Rohirrim were native men who had risen by their cavalry. Their borders stretched west to the river Isen and the Anduin toward Isengard and the Dunlendings, south to the arid Nimrais and the streams near Gondor, east to the Entwash, and north to the Limelight. Edoras, the capital, sat against the White Mountains near the slopes of arid Nimrais, a mountain stronghold by design. But time had left its mark. The once bright city now felt thin and a little neglected. People no longer loitered in the markets. Transactions were quick, words few. Everyone in Rohan knew why, yet loyalty made them endure silently. The king's orders were not to be questioned. Today, however, the tide seemed to be turning. Two groups of special guests had arrived in Edoras. The first had helped King Theoden recover his mind and drove out the treacherous Grima. The second had brought new life to the weary city. Across the Rohan plains, a column stretched for hundreds of meters, 4,000 to 5,000 souls winding like a great serpent across the grass. Viewed at a distance, it was a mass. Up close, one saw that most were old, infirm women, children, many injured, and few able-bodied youths. At the head rode Eno on a brown nag, glancing back over the procession. It all dated to 6 months earlier. When he left the Shire, he had taken the sky with an animagus transfiguration toward Rohan, expecting a smooth trip. Darkness, however, had complicated everything. Villages and market towns along the way had been swarmed by orcs. Once inside Rohan, the scourge grew worse. The elderly, the pregnant, the innocent, no one could look away. Eno could not. What followed needs no elaboration. From rescuing a handful of infants and children in ruined villages, the group swelled into thousands of refugees. Each hamlet they passed added to the ranks. The flight that should have taken 10 days became a 6-month march. Eno never regretted it. When he saw an ugly orc raise its blade toward a child of 2 or 3, his choice was made. Even if it meant missing the story's timeline, even if he gained nothing in Middle-earth, he would not abandon those who needed him. Chapter 250, Meeting an Old Friend, Theoden of Rohan White Mountains, the capital of Rohan, Edoras. Inside the magnificent Great Hall, Gandalf stood quietly before the throne. Seated there was King Theoden. Long erosion and the dark bewitchment had left this once valiant ruler frail and aged. His face was twisted, his eyes hollow. He looked like a stiff puppet. With Grima subdued, the other guards did not interfere with the outsiders. Some even harbored a faint hope that this renowned wizard of Middle-earth might save their king. A suffocating tension filled the great hall. Gandalf, staff in hand, stood less than 5 meters from Theoden. He uttered a quiet, mysterious word, and at once the king let out a piercing sneer. "You do not have enough magic, Greybeard. Gandalf!" At that sneer, Gandalf shrugged off his gray cloak. He shed the gray robe and a dazzling white light poured from him. The glow was so brilliant and sacred that everyone instinctively squinted. The Maiar sent to Middle-earth no longer hid his strength. Power gathered in his staff, and facing Gandalf now arrayed in white, the possessed Theoden fell silent, his body seeming bound to the throne by invisible shackles. Then the poison was drawn away. Freed from Saruman's control, Theoden's frailty dropped away. He returned to a middle-aged man in an instant. A brave figure pushed through the crowd and gently supported the newly conscious king. "I know your face, Éowyn." Theoden looked at the young woman with difficulty and said hoarsely, "I seem to have had a very long nightmare. But now the dream is over. Breathe freely, my friend." Gandalf's voice was full of encouragement. "You are Gandalf." Theoden murmured, glancing about and noticing two familiar faces were missing. Where is Hyoged and Eomer? On the plains 30 miles from Dorzoralis, a young voice rang out. Hyoged. Eno pressed his staff to his throat, amplifying his words. As the echo fell across the field, a blond youth leading dozens of cavalry broke from the main group and urged his war horses forward. In a few minutes, he was at the head of the procession. Hyoged, later, take your cavalry and distribute food. We'll try to reach Edoras today, Eno instructed. He had recognized the youth at once. Hyoged, Crown Prince of Rohan and Theoden's only son. He was supposed to have died at the fords of Isen, but fate had led him to a scattered group of the old, the weak, women, and children. Out of gratitude, and from the sense of duty of a crown prince, Hyoged had led the remaining cavalry to join them. Many in the group were Rohirrim. Leave it to me. Hyoged's voice was steady. The near brush with death had made the young prince more composed. Very good, then let's begin. Eno took a piece of dried cheese and some ham from a box and waved his staff. The food seemed to multiply. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, soon piling up into a small mountain. Though they had seen it many times, Hyoged and the cavalry still watched in awed silence. They did not linger in wonder. They dismounted, took woven sacks from their horses, and packed the food methodically. While the cavalry distributed provisions, Eno took a moment to light a pipe, a Shire specialty, letting its smoke curl up into the cold air. He had never hidden what he was doing. All along the road, he had used magic openly to supply the thousands in the group. It was simple necessity. These were survivors of orc attacks, people who had lived through slaughter with almost no supplies. Without magic to stretch their food, the families, old and young, would have starved within days. Some say a multitude of 10,000 is beyond count. In truth, the procession numbered far fewer, yet it stretched for hundreds of meters. As dusk fell, the city on the hill came into view, Edoras, the capital of Rohan. At the same moment, in Edoras's great hall, a meeting that might determine the fate of Middle-earth was underway. These are only the beginnings of Saruman's bloody massacres, Gandalf said earnestly. His brutality stems from his fear of Sauron. You must stand. Only then can you save your people. Theoden did not answer at once. He wrestled with the decision in his heart. Rohan could not easily withstand another war. He knew that better than anyone. During the years he had been bewitched, Grima's reckless deeds had crippled the land. Edoras could not even muster 1,000 cavalry now. Rohan had never been weaker. Seeing the king's silence, Aragorn stepped forward. You still have 2,000 elite riders in the north, Eomer and his Rohirrim. At that moment, a low bell began to toll outside the door. The alarm bell! Theoden sprang to his feet, seized the sword at his side, and strode for the entrance. Gandalf, Aragorn, and the others reached for their weapons and followed. The capital's alarm bell, silent for over 100 years, had begun to ring. Its sudden clamor sent a ripple of panic through Edoras, but the people steadied quickly. One by one, without orders, Rohirrim began to arm themselves. Old men, injured and lame middle-aged folk, even half-grown children took up whatever weapon they could find. Farm tools, short bows, rusty swords. In that moment, age meant nothing. They were all soldiers of Rohan. The children trembled, but none backed away. When they formed ranks, the elder men instinctively stepped to the front like a living shield. Though stooped and worn, they stood firm. Theoden and his companions climbed to the highest point of the city gate and peered out. On the horizon, a black line stretched and waved for hundreds of meters, an ominous shape creeping toward them. Chapter 251, The Final Resolution. Helm's Deep under the setting sun, Edoras came into view. The 6-month journey at last ended. The company of over 5,000 people erupted in cheers. Long hidden smiles touched their tired faces as the procession moved slowly forward. Unlike the others, Eno had noticed the fully armed soldiers of Edoras much earlier. To avoid misunderstandings, he drew his wand from horseback and pointed it at the sky. Incendio! A torrent of orange flames burst forth. Within seconds, a fireball, over 10 meters across, hung aloft. Under a spell of revelation, the flames shifted and arranged themselves into words of fire that blazed across the sky. We are the people of Rohan. The appearance of the giant flaming message made the soldiers on the walls breathe easier, though they remained at their posts until ordered otherwise. They mean no harm, Gandalf said, staff in hand, watching the burning letters. As a servant of the secret fire and the bearer of the elven ring Narya, Gandalf read much in those flames: hope, salvation, longing, love. Fire repelled the dark. That was why the message could not be turned by shadow. At that moment, a dozen light cavalry galloped out from the great host. Rohan horses thundered across the plain. In minutes, everyone could see the riders' faces. Hyojed, my son! Theoden, who had been expressionless all day after being freed from Saruman's grip that morning, finally showed real feeling. It was spring of the Third Age, 3019. The almost desolate capital of Rohan had at last caught a glimpse of hope. In a single day, King Theoden had regained his mind, and their crown prince, the second Marshal Hyojed, had returned with thousands of Rohirrim. The vast hall was lit with torches. Where once there had been a somber hush, now people wore faint, wary smiles. After greeting old friends, Eno slipped into a corner of the council hall and listened. Unlike the story he had known, where Theoden mourned a lost son, this Theoden stood renewed and confident. Everything seemed the same and utterly changed. "Why are you sitting here alone?" a clear voice asked in his ear. Eno looked up. Golden hair and a fresh, determined face met his. "My name is Eowyn, niece of King Theoden," she said. Whether from arrangements for the women and children, or from overhearing earlier, Eowyn already knew the facts. One solitary figure had crossed from the Isen in the west, ridden half the plains in 6 months, destroyed countless dark servants, and rescued thousands of Rohirrim, including her cousin Hyojed. More than 5,000 survivors had been brought to Edoras without supplies and unharmed. Such feats filled her with the sort of admiration she reserved for heroes. But now she found this hero sitting quietly by himself at the edge of the hall. When Eno heard her name, of a woman warrior whose courage equaled any man's, a faint echo of the tale stirred in his mind. He answered simply, "I am only a passerby. It's not my place to sit in a council that decides Rohan's fate. Besides, I've known your Uncle Theoden for 50 years, so I will not say anything to influence him." 50 years? Eowyn's eyes widened. She had guessed he was younger. "Yes, 50 years. Eno nodded. "I'm a painter. I painted Theoden back then. If you like, I can paint you as well, 1 gold coin. Time slipped by in easy talk. They joked about a certain young king and a stolen toffee, and then a majestic voice rang out. "I didn't snatch your candy. I wrote an IOU. For that, I waited for you for 50 whole years." Eno looked up and found Theoden standing by him, Gandalf and Legolas at his side, old friends reunited. "Have you finished discussing?" Theoden asked. "We have," Eno said. Theoden sighed softly. "We leave tomorrow for Helm's Deep. To defend the city there is to avoid needless loss." Eno agreed. The Rohirrim were unbeatable on horseback, but when a fortress could be held, there was no need to meet war on the open plain. Gandalf stepped forward. "In just 100 years, your growth amazes me, and your deeds amaze me still more. Thank you for what you have done for Middle-earth." "You are too kind. I only followed my heart," Eno replied, looking at Gandalf with a calm face. In the past, Gandalf had seemed only an old man in gray, but now, through the white robe, Eno caught sight of a faint glowing figure. The light was bright, yet not unbearable. Feeling it might be rude to stare, he shifted his gaze to Legolas beside him. Eowyn watched them all with curiosity. She had thought 50 years long. Who would have guessed the matter stretched back 100? Night passed briefly and peacefully. Dawn brought a clear light over Edoras and the wide plains. All the dark creatures, except Saruman's Uruk-hai, had withdrawn. The bells of the capital rang again, not an alarm, but a call to assembly. People packed what little they had and walked out of their homes in silence. They all knew where they were going, Rohan's last stronghold, Helm's Deep. 500 cavalry, led by Hyojed, rode out as scouts to clear the road ahead. Eno followed as well, riding his flying broom. This road would not be entirely safe. Saruman had sent many warg riders to lie in wait. As they moved, Eno thought about the supplies they carried. Magic had its limits. Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration was a basic rule in the wizarding arts. While a wizard could transfigure or create many things, food was the first of 5 exceptions. One could not conjure a delicious meal from nothing. Still, if you knew where food already was, you could summon it. If you had some food, you could transfigure or multiply it. That knowledge explained how these 5,000 had been kept fed during the long retreat, by finding, rescuing, transforming, and multiplying what was already there, not by pulling sustenance from the void. Chapter 252, Burning Flames, Crushing Bones, and Raising Ashes. Across the broad plains of Rohan, 500 fully armed cavalry thundered along, spears in hand, each rider also carrying flails and a bow. The bows, in particular, made the most of the riders' mobility. Hooves drummed the earth and dust rose in the wake of their passage. After half an hour of riding, the troops spread out. The 500 men split into 5 companies of 100 and began to scout in every direction. As commander, Heojed knew the danger of dividing his force. Cavalry was at its deadliest when it could concentrate and charge. Scattered and few, they could be picked off. But he had no choice. Their duty was to clear the way and remove obstacles for the tens of thousands of Rohan refugees following behind. Once glorious Rohan and prosperous Adoras had been reduced to this. 500 riders was the best they could muster. The scout unit Heojed led rode across the plain uneventfully for most of the morning until a short, urgent horn blast split the air. "Prepare to fight," he called. The men obeyed instantly, spurring their horses and forming a charge. Then a few mournful howls cut through the sound of hooves, and the formation fell into chaos. "Wolf riders, switch to bows!" Heojed barked. He had seen this unit at the Eisen. Facing mounted wargs in close combat was deadly. Even if a cavalry charge succeeded, the losses would be severe. The riders wheeled, stringing arrows to the bowstrings, and from the horizon a tide of dark shapes rushed toward them. Twisted-faced orcs sitting astride wargs, immense wolves over 2 meters long, plunged forward. From a distance, they might have looked like oversized wolves, but as they closed, the Rohan troops saw the blood-red glare of their eyes and the bulk of their shaggy flanks. A cold doubt ran through the ranks. Were their arrows enough to pierce those hides? The enemy's numbers looked to be 200 or 300. "Don't panic. Aim for the eyes. Fire 2 volleys, then fall back. Make it a war of endurance. Wargs run fast, but they can't outlast war horses," Heojed ordered, steadying them with the hard-won lessons from Eisen. The wargs thundered forward until they were in bow range, but before the first arrows left the strings, a wall of searing flame roared up out of nowhere. The fire spread with a will of its own, and within breaths, encircled the wolf riders. Screams of orcs and beasts filled the air as fire ate the attackers. In the sky above, Ino slowly lowered his staff. For other enemies, even a dark wizard, Ino might not reach for flame. But for these orcs, whether by Sectum Sempra or the Killing Curse or any other darkness, fire felt fitting. 6 months of travel had shown him too many scenes that looked like purgatory. Burning these pests to ash seemed the only just reward. A painless death was too easy for them. When the screams faded, Ino quietly dispelled his magic. He gave Heojed a nod from high above, then spurred his broom and streaked across the sky. This wave of warg riders was not the first he'd destroyed. 3 waves had gone before, and it would not be the last. As a creation of Saruman, they were mass-produced. Given time, more would come. He could not linger. On the ground, the Rohan soldiers stared at the blackened corpses, shaken. "Your Highness, was that him?" a young soldier blurted, eyeing the wizard. Heojed shook his head, then smiled. "Not at first." He sighed, but there was admiration in his voice. "He says he's a painter, a bard, but I think he's Rohan's hero." The word changed him. The wistfulness hardened into respect. "A legend," Heojed added. "He used fire to cut through the darkness that settled over Rohan." Helm's Deep, Rohan's last fortress, sat north of the White Mountains in a valley of southern Westfold. Its narrow mouth opened into a wider bowl backed by cliffs, and behind it yawned the Glittering Caves, a name that sounded pleasant, but in truth the caves were a vast natural hollow that could shelter non-combatants and store supplies. On the 4th day after leaving Adoras, they reached the fortress without incident. From the 2nd day on, the roads had been clear. Saruman had evidently chosen not to harry them further. Perhaps he had sensed something and did not want needless losses. Ino did not care either way. He had nothing to lose. Even if Saruman was a Maya without a backer was no more secure than a Balrog without a cause. Standing on the granite wall, he felt how much Middle-earth was a world of patrons and power. Smaug had died, and that had been that. The Balrog had been slain cleanly. But for Gandalf, death had been some sort of promotion ritual. A familiar voice came behind him. "What are you thinking about?" Theoden, making his usual inspection of the defenses, had recognized his old friend from a distance. Eno turned slowly. "After this battle," he said, "you'll owe me a favor." Even the war-hardened king laughed. "Of course, and I'll commission you to paint Hyojed, though he'll pay for his own portrait." "Hyojed?" Eno's mouth twitched. "He's not very clever. More reckless than you." The image flashed before him. Isen River, the first time he had met Hyojed. The young prince had thrown himself into a desperate charge to cover his soldiers' retreat, leading dozens of knights straight at 1,000-man orc force. As a warrior, he had been fearless. As a commander, he had been effective. But as the sole heir of Rohan, he was perhaps a touch too reckless. Chapter 253, Boggart's Fear, Smokehelm's Deep. Though called a fortress, it was really two parts: a deep defensive wall on the east that ran into the cliffs of the White Mountains, and a semicircular, towering stronghold built on the rock to the west, the Hornburg. Eno and Theoden stood side by side on that solid, broad defensive wall. Below them spread the plain at the valley entrance, and above it a sky bruised by cloud. "Will they really attack head-on?" Theoden's voice faltered. As the ruler of Rohan, he knew better than most that a direct assault on Helm's Deep would be reckless. "Are you worried they'll bypass us?" Eno asked. He understood Theoden's concern. If the Uruk-hai skirted Helm's Deep and rampaged through Rohan, not only could Rohan fall, but the orcs' momentum would swell and sweep farther. He was genuinely worried. What if they bypass Helm's Deep and strike the Moria Creek Plain to the south, or even march straight to Gondor? Theoden looked into the distance, troubled. Lately, the sun had been seldom seen, either dull skies or rain. "Don't worry," Eno said with certainty. "My scouts reported a large force moving directly toward Helm's Deep." Before leaving Adoras, he had asked Fide to patrol Rohan. After the Uruk-hai were spotted, the Phoenix had taken to the sky and tracked their movements precisely. "Eno, did you block the drainage tunnel? That's Helm's Deep's only real weakness," Theoden pressed. He had told Theoden about the tunnel early on. Theoden answered, "It was sealed this morning, stacked with well-polished rocks. Even if they could move them with no interference, it would take them half a day." Theoden looked down at the base of the wall with lingering dread. At first, he had scoffed when he heard of the drainage tunnel. How many could squeeze through such a small opening, he had thought, and it was barred with an iron grate. But the sight of his old friend casually blasting a huge rock had taught him otherwise. Saruman was a wizard and the head of the White Council. After Theoden spoke, the two fell silent. They stood together and watched the plain, time seeming to slow. Finally, Theoden broke the stillness. "Why are you helping me so much?" "Honestly, neither Rohan nor I can offer a proper reward." For the first time, Theoden sounded insecure. A hint of embarrassment showed. Rohan was no Gondor, no Lonely Mountain, no Rivendell. As its king, he felt that keenly. Eno did not answer immediately. He reflected on why he had come. Was it magic, strength, confidence, old loyalties, a debt to Lena? Each reason surfaced and then slipped away. He looked toward the Hornburg again. By Theoden's command, every able-bodied man in Rohan had taken up arms. Even boys barely in their teens stood in chainmail like men. Their slender forms, helmets on, did not always reach the battlements. "I'm not doing this for reward," Eno said at last. "I'm doing what I think is right. It's not about race or profit." Night fell over Helm's Deep like a heavy curtain. The moon was blanketed by clouds, and only stray stars pierced the dark. Countless torches burned along the walls, lighting faces and lending courage to the defenders. At King Elrond's command, 200 elven reinforcements arrived as promised. Their presence bolstered the Rohirrim, proof that other forces in Middle-earth had not forgotten them. But even with those 200, the garrison numbered barely 800, and they faced at least 10,000 Uruk-hai, perhaps more. Eno's worry was not only for numbers. He feared Saruman's intervention. If the traitorous Maya chose not to hide his powers, the battlefield could change in an instant. Minute after minute passed in oppressive silence. Then a lookout cried, "They're here!" Eno glanced at Haldir, the elven commander beside him. He had chosen to defend the outer wall with the elves rather than hold the Hornburg with Theoden. In the hush, a low mounting roar rose from the horizon. The Uruk-hai poured forward like a tide, torches flickering across the plain. Saruman had invested heavily in them. They were larger and better equipped than ordinary orcs. Their heavy armor and the measured beat of their march made the valley itself shudder. Confined by the mountain walls, the sound of their steps only grew more ominous. The defenders readied themselves. In the dark, Eno summoned the boggart. Ink-black smoke flowed from his shadow and began to crawl outward beneath the cover of night. In a battle of blades and hooves, the boggart's area effect terror was a powerful tool. As the smoke spread and thinned, its color faded, but it still rolled over the plain outside Helm's Deep. The Uruk-hai's once regular steps staggered, their marching rhythm broken. Perhaps the fear worked only partially. Their formation did not collapse, but the change was enough. In a battlefield where iron and courage counted, morale could decide everything. The steady drum of marching had been a weapon. Without it, the Uruk-hai were less terrible. Satisfied, Eno raised his wand and pointed it at the sky over the enemy lines. Expecto Patronum, Chapter 254, Patronus Charms Morale Boost. The ancient white Patronus, a charm from the wizarding world, was about to appear in Middle-earth for the first time. Under the night sky, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if answering something. When the incantation fell, the tip of the wand flared with a dazzling light, and a silver beam shot into the heavens. Countless silver mists gathered, instantly illuminating the sky above Helm's Deep and giving rise to a sacred, warming aura. Bathed in that light, whether elf on the outer wall or Rohirrim inside Hornburg, everyone felt heat and strength flood through them, a faint joy like harvest time swelling in their chests. They suddenly knew they were not alone. Facing the Uruk-hai army, their fear ebbed. Morale among the combined elf and human forces at Helm's Deep shifted in an instant. Even the silver cloud mass above seemed to change. Under the starlight, something moved within it, a shape faintly taking form. The horn sounded, its clear note cut through the valley, the same horn that, in the old tale, had called men to courage on the fifth dawn. The melodious cry echoed off the cliffs and breathed battle into the hearts of Rohan's people. For glory, for the people, soldiers of Rohan, counterattack! Theoden drew his sword and, standing on Hornburg's battlements, gave the kingly call. They might lack Númenórean blood, the Dúnedain's long years, or the elves' timeless skill, but the Rohirrim had always been the truest of men, hard, loyal, and fearless on horseback. The battle began anew. The elf archers on the wall were the first to react, bows bent and released in perfect rhythm, each volley felling over 200 Uruk-hai. The Rohirrim inside Hornburg were just as determined, losing a hail of arrows. Perhaps Saruman had truly bred creatures to this purpose. Even under the boggart's mantle of fear, the Uruk-hai charged on without flinching. For a while, wave after wave fell, until, after sacrificing countless lives, they finally reached the walls and began the siege in earnest. Grappling hooks and thick ropes flew at the curtain wall, buried and secured. Orcs hauled on pulleys and hauled up a dozen tall siege ladders. The heavy wooden ladders, pulled by countless Uruks, creaked and began to rise. Then, Sectum Sempra! A curse of the dark arts, spoken through seething intent, cut like an invisible blade through the ropes holding the ladders. With a sharp tearing sound, each rope snapped. The ladders, built from solid trunks, toppled like drunken giants and crashed down across the bodies of the Uruk-hai. Their momentum shattered. For a moment, the assault stalled. Eno stood on the wall with his wand still smoking, not wasting time on the stragglers. With their ladders gone and the drainage channel blocked, the Uruk-hai below were open targets. What he worried at least as much about was Saruman. Was the wizard being constrained from acting or simply delayed by other events? The thought came from the Book of Old Stories. When the Ents attacked Fangorn, Saruman had seemed almost passive atop Orthanc, letting water and wood wreck his domain. It troubled him. Speculation aside, Ino knew that with his full power, he could level even Helm's Deep, and would certainly overwhelm Saruman. So he restrained himself. He intervened only enough to influence the immediate fight, cutting ladder ropes, glazing the Hornburg slope with frost, and then summoning a smear of butter on top to make it treacherous. It was small, surgical help. He would not let the Uruk-hai sally drag him away from watching Saruman. The fighting carried on through the night. The elves, with steady hands and endless patience, did not miss a beat. Their rhythm never faltered. The men of Rohan, however, began to tire. Human stamina is finite. After countless draws, their arms shook. Some could no longer keep a steady grip on their longbows. But where bows failed, javelins, battle axes, flails, and stones took up the burden. Hornburg itself became a storm of thrown weapons. The style of combat shifted, ugly and direct. Gimli suffered more than most. He had little role to play from the high battlements. Walls taller than a dwarf made sight and reach a problem, and Legolas's barbed jibes didn't help. When they come up, Gimli grumbled back when taunted, they will see the true strength of a dwarf's axe. In a fair fight, I will take 10 of them, unlike some long ears who hide and shoot. But you haven't killed a single one yet, Legolas shot back, finding the tender spot with cruel precision. Ah! Gimli roared and unstrapped his axe. With a running leap, he hurled it at the nearest Uruk-hai. The sheer force sent the heavy blade flying true. Oh ho! You've killed one now, so I take back what I said, Legolas teased after another arrow found its mark. But only one. The night wore into dawn. By first light, nearly every Uruk-hai outside Helm's Deep lay dead or maimed. One could almost admire Saruman's brutal efficiency. Among the dark things of Middle-earth, only the Uruk-hai fought with such relentlessness. As dawn spread, the valley and the Patronus above were both flooded with silver light. Eno felt it like a pull and looked up. A swimming figure was coalescing in the silver-white mist, bright and fluent. At the same time, the black fog that had clung to the valley all night drew back, running away like a tide. The boggart's reign between life and death had noticeably weakened. The thick, pitch-black mist that had fallen like a curtain, letting no light through, now shrank and slipped back toward the shadows like swallows returning to nests. And then, on the eastern slope, a white-robed knight appeared, as if nothing had happened. Chapter 255, Unexpected Gains, Helm's Deep. The valley that had once belonged to Rohan's kings was now piled with the corpses of Uruk-hai. When Eomer arrived, with 2,000 Rohirrim elites, he too was startled by the sight. Beneath the defensive wall and around the Hornburg, the dead lay in heaps, in places almost reaching the height of the battlements. The Uruk-hai had fought with a frightening, relentless ferocity. They had charged as if they would never rest until every last one fell. Even Rohan's finest would have found such a battle hard to emulate. On the plains outside the valley, Gandalf turned and, seeing the shock on the riders' faces, knew he had to speak before their fear hardened into dread. Eomer, this is Saruman's foul craft, he called. He raised his staff, nearly 2 meters tall, and pointed to the white handprint stamped on many of the Uruk-hai's breastplates. Saruman poured his power into them. He has made them unafraid of the sun and bewitched them into absolute killing machines. Fortunately, Gandalf added, his power has limits. We are unlikely to see the like of them again. Eomer's expression eased. For cavalry, the most terrible enemy is one that will not break. Once a charge falters against such foes, disaster follows. A long, clear horn blast answered from the direction of Fangorn Forest. The Ents, long dormant, were awakening. The horn carried to the outer reaches of the damaged woods and roused the forest's anger. Ancient treebeards stirred across Fangorn, enormous, slow-moving beings, 10 meters tall on average, whose heavy strides closed ground quickly. With wrath they advanced toward the Tower of Isengard. Saruman had felt that rising fury the moment the horn sounded, but his strength was dissipated. The countless Uruk-hai, each one consuming only a fragment of his power, had nevertheless drained him. He was left unable to stop the forest's reckoning. On the broad plains of Rohan, after the main body of Uruk-hai had been driven off, Theoden ordered the army's return to Edoras. A tide of people stretched across the grassland. The capital could not be left unguarded. It was not only a matter of honor, but of symbol. As long as Rohan's banner flew in Edoras, the land would not be overrun. Unlike the somber faces at their departure, those in the returning procession were radiant. Young and old understood, in whatever measure they could, that the shadow that had ravaged the fields was gone. The simplest human desire, simply to live, suffused them. Eno did not ride his conspicuous flying broom, but followed more quietly on a Rohan warhorse, keeping pace with the army. With Eomer and his elite guard escorting them, there was little need for worry. Even if another 10,000 Urukai had appeared, the riders could have met them. Although the ride was leisurely and his mount docile, the journey had its small annoyances. Eowyn, on a brown warhorse, spoke up with a curious, expectant look. "So that white light, is it a power of belief?" Eno pretended not to hear, quietly turning his head. As he did, Hyojed came into view. The two had been talking steadily since they left the valley. Eowyn did most of the talking. Hyojed listened with steady attention, and Eno had his own way of answering their curiosity. "Do you want some candy?" he asked. He produced 2 butter toffees and offered one to the Rohan prince and the other to the princess beside him. Hyojed, who appeared to share his father's sweet tooth, took his with delight. Eowyn declined for the moment. Her face was still full of questions. "Since you won't take candy, how would you like a weapon, a blade with magic in it?" Eno remembered the one-handed sword old Bands had given him when he ordered musical instruments, a free gift, yet in hardness and keen edge able to outmatch the common blades of Middle-earth's men. "Good," Eowyn agreed readily, then, catching herself, bowed her head slightly and whispered, "Thank you." Hyojed glanced between them and at the candy in his hand, which had suddenly lost some of its appeal. Who would have thought that refusing candy might win you a weapon? But he had already taken his sweet. He could only smile ruefully. "Don't worry, you'll get one too," Eno promised, noticing the mood. The return was swift, 2.5 days, and peaceful, perhaps because the Uruk-hai threat had been broken and everyone was eager for home. Edoras, set against the White Mountains, looked more worn and weathered than before, but the people felt a raw, honest joy, the relief of having survived. On his mount, Eno felt that collective feeling keenly, the plainest wish of ordinary folk, to live in safety and peace. He did not speak, yet a faint flame appeared before his eyes, as if an invisible match had been struck. At the head of the procession, Gandalf, newly styled White Wizard, seemed to sense the same thing. He smiled and looked back. Although the distance was great, his gaze found something. After a long moment, he turned away, raised his staff, and a ring set with a red gem flashed briefly on his hand. That night, Edoras was unusually still. After the war, everyone relished the hard-won calm. Under the stars, the city's quietness held life within it, like a seed in the ground that would break the soil and sprout in spring. Near the center of the city, on a slope not far from the council hall, was a room of extreme simplicity. A straw-covered bed, a plain wooden table and bench, little else. On the table stood an old bronze oil lamp, its warm flame alive and gently flickering. Chapter 256, The Power of Vitality. The little room felt lived in and old. Eno leaned against the straw-strewn pallet as the oil lamp on the table burned quietly. Its flame trembled with the wick. Beside the bed, a ceramic teapot and matching cup hovered in the air. No visible heat source, yet the spout released a steady ribbon of steam and a faint tea scent. The spare furnishings, the dancing lamplight, the floating teapot, all of it gave the place a calm, almost private kind of peace, the sort that made the world's noise feel distant. The harvest after Helm's Deep had been unexpected. What had changed was obvious. The boggart's influence, the plains beyond the valley, even the nature of the flame and the Patronus charm, everything had shifted. The plains outside were wrapped in a dark, fear-tainted smoke rising from the misery of over 10,000 people. By dawn, it had thickened almost into a roof. But more than that, on the return trip, the gathered simple emotions of the Rohan survivors, relief, gratitude, the tender desire for ordinary peace, had somehow altered the flame itself. It had turned inward and living, full of redemption. Eno recognized the pattern. It echoed the time before Fide's birth, when a flame had absorbed the curses and resentments in the dance of delicate snow and first stirred with life. It was surprising, yes, but not inexplicable. He had rescued more than half of those 10,000 as he crossed the plains. These were people who had truly felt pain, and because it had been so sharp, their gratitude for peace was more intense. The victory, the end of terror, those simple feelings had pooled together, and the flame had ignited on its own, like dry kindling meeting the right heat. Eno had not expected any of it. He had not even considered it, but the change had come naturally, as if by silent agreement. He sat up slowly. The teapot dutifully poured a cup of warm black tea. After he drank, Eno's eyes returned to the lamp. This new flame was not Fide's clear blue fire. Instead, tucked quietly in the bronze lamp, a tiny living flame, no taller than an inch, burned with a different kind of power. When it had first appeared on the road back, its spark had moved him. To others, it might have been a flicker, but to him, it carried a wide, unmistakable emotion. Theirs was a yearning for peace, for a life where children could be born and seeds could sprout. It was the concentrated force of life itself. Two extremes, he murmured. Fide and now a companion. Fide gathered despair and destruction. This new flame condensed hope and vitality. Dawn spread thin and pale like silk over Adoras the next morning. The ancient capital looked like an old tree that had pushed out new shoots after a spring rain. After a night's rest, everyone was busy again. Hearing the bustle beyond his small window, Eno washed quickly and began to prepare breakfast. If the Rohirrim were not in such a fragile recovery, he would have been content to live off the meager rations in his pack. But there was no market, no proper housing, and several thousand of Adoras's most vulnerable, old people, the infirm, women and children, had lost their homes in the fighting. Forcing them back onto the plains now would be cruelty. On the rough wooden table he set out sliced ham, a block of cheese, and a pot of boiling black tea. A soft knock at the door interrupted him. He opened it to find a tall figure in white. Gandalf greeted him with a half-smile. "Good morning. I hope I haven't disturbed you." "Good morning, Gandalf. Please, come in." Eno stepped aside. The wizard sat on the long bench, and unusually frank for so early a visit, said, "I had nowhere else to go. If you truly have no place, come with me. In a few days I'll set up a stall in Adoras. Help me there. I'll pay you." Eno bowed his head politely. "I appreciate it, but now's not a good time." He didn't fully believe Gandalf's offer, and he used the refusal to end the talk quickly. He had long tried to keep his distance from the Maiar. As his power had grown, and he looked back on many events, it had become clear that some people saw far more than they let on. 100 years ago at Bjorn's, he had disguised himself as an adult with polyjuice potion. In hindsight, he doubted that disguise had fooled anyone for long. If old bands of Hogsmeade could sense something off, Gandalf surely could. Gandalf had guided the dwarves through Mirkwood and even lent a sword to a small, scarcely grown companion, gestures that suggested deeper calculations. Eno's feeling about the wizard had always been complicated, undoubtedly good, even great, but terrifying in the way that greatness can be. Unlike Dumbledore's quiet self-sacrifice, Gandalf thought always of the larger pattern, sometimes at the cost of the individual. It reminded Eno of old Muggle games where the hero pursues the main quest, defeating the Demon King, while ordinary townsfolk's plights are background noise. The clearest example was recent. Even after Rohan had been drained by battle and lay raw from Helm's Deep, Gandalf had urged Theoden to join Gondor's aid, even to light the beacon of Minas Tirith. In stories that was stirring, a light of hope kindled to summon allies, but from another angle it put Theoden between impossible choices. Refuse and be branded a betrayer, send troops and bleed his people dry. No one seemed to count the cost to Rohan's ordinary lives, or how many would ever return to the plains whole. The small room fell silent. Eno glanced through the open door at the busy street beyond. Outside, the people of Rohan were at work, young men carrying distributed food, young women bearing bamboo baskets of vegetables, even the old and the small helping where they could. Adoras, just beyond the threshold, was a vivid picture of daily life. Inside, Gandalf's snowy robes glowed so brightly they made him squint. "I'm going to set up my stall now. Do you want to come? Or you can have breakfast here. Don't worry, I haven't touched any of it," Gandalf said. Eno picked up his suitcase and stepped out. Adoras, the Rohirrim capital, also climbed the hillside like Minas Tirith, but it lacked that city's solemn order. Here the air was freer and more peaceful. Aside from the high council hall on the crest, the city had no strict inner and outer divisions. People wandered freely. As Eno walked along the Bluestone Way, passers-by greeted him with quiet pout, respectful looks rather than words, a Rohan way of thanking someone without intrusion. The Bluestone still held last night's dew, catching the first light like a silver ribbon winding forward. He chose a relatively quiet corner, opened his suitcase, and spread a thick linen cloth on the ground. He set out a curious little assortment: pretty Christmas caps, pure wool socks, knitted scarves, a pair of second-hand dragonhide gloves, finely woven straw rings, and some unused potion glass bottles. With each item laid down, the small stall stopped looking shabby. When he was done, he sat on the ground, not bothering to conjure the little stool he usually made with transfiguration. At the council hall that same morning, Gandalf pressed the stakes harder, and Theoden grew more troubled. Theoden had ties to Gondor, born in Minas Tirith and raised with happy memories there before returning to Rohan to inherit the throne, and he could not bear the thought of Gondor falling. Yet Rohan's strength was insufficient for another campaign. Silence settled over the hall. Seeing the king's hesitation, Gandalf spoke again. "My friend, Sauron will show no mercy. He will not stop his slaughter once he destroys Gondor. All we can do is resist. Let everyone take up arms." "Aid Gondor." "Ha!" The Crown Prince Heojed snapped. "Where was Gondor when Rohan was attacked? Where were the reinforcements? At Helm's Deep, I only saw 200 elves from Lothlorien." Gandalf ignored the prince's outburst and looked at Theoden. Rohan's former king swore fealty to Isildur at the Stone of Erech, promising that Rohan would come to Gondor's aid in its hour of need. At those words, a chill crossed Theoden's face. He was no longer answering only for himself. He had to think of his son. Yet none of this was new. An ancient treaty, even from 3,000 years past, still bound them. To openly break it would be costly. "Then let the steward of Gondor light the beacons," Theoden said, his voice stiff. "Only when the beacons of aid are seen will Rohan dispatch troops. I will personally lead the Rohirrim cavalry to fulfill the old alliance." Gandalf rode out on Shadowfax before dusk. At the same hour, Eno began packing his stall. Half a day of trading had brought him a simple, long-missed pleasure. Stall was too grand a word. What he ran was more a makeshift trading post. With war just over and industry slow to recover, many people had no money. Barter had returned. One man might trade a wooden basin for a pair of socks, and the basin would pass hands again a minute later until everything circulated in an improvised market that soon thinned his line of customers. Not everyone had lost interest. Children were fascinated by the pretty glass bottles and the ornate Christmas caps. Looking at their eager faces, Eno waved them over and set a rule: gather pebbles. 3 pretty pebbles for a bottle, 15 for a cap. If a child came up short, he could make up the difference with a little transfiguration. He had learned the approach from the orphanage matron back in England. "Nothing is ever free. You can only get what you want with your own hands," the matron had told him. Eno agreed. For a child with a family, gifts could be a joy. But for an orphan, becoming used to handouts could leave them helpless when they left the shelter. Teaching them to earn things was a small lesson toward independence. Many of the children wandering about Adoras were orphans he'd picked up on the road. He held their effort in respect. As dusk settled, he returned to the little house where he had started the morning, suitcase in his left hand and a linen-wrapped sack of pebbles in his right. He had no intention of throwing those pebbles away. Everyone's work mattered, however small. He pushed the door open and found guests inside, 3 young people about the same age. Hyojed lounged there with a sour look, and opposite him sat the siblings Eowyn and Eomer. "Ha! My little room is almost as busy as the council hall," Eno said with a grin. He was joking, but not greatly exaggerating. The Crown Prince Heojed, second in line, the second marshal, Eomer, third marshal and captain of the royal guard, and Princess Eowyn, revered among the Rohirrim. These 3, together and apart, would shape much of Middle-earth's fate in the years to come. Shaudi's magical creatures share for today: winged horse, British Ministry of Magic classification level XXXX, origin and distribution. Winged horses are found across the world. Appearance: there are many breeds: Abraxan, Ethenan, Granian, and the rare Thestral. Related knowledge: like hippogriffs, owners of winged horses are required to cast a disillusionment charm on them periodically to prevent detection by muggles. In the simple, unadorned room, Eno finished speaking. Heojed was the first to rise. "You're back. We didn't mean to come in, but the door was open," he said awkwardly. A trace of restraint crossed the young Rohan prince's face. "Relax, my friend," Eno replied with a smile, stepping into the room. He set a large bag of stones in a corner. They clinked crisply as they hit the floor. "What's that?" "Stones," Owen asked, curious. "Yes, stones, and the result of a lot of people's efforts," Eno said, He waved his wand. The ceramic teapot on the table shivered to life, and the teacup split into three. The teapot poured water into the cups, and Eowyn glanced back at the linen-wrapped pile. "I heard about this afternoon," she said, "but I don't have anything decent to offer." "No," Eno interrupted. "These are different. The weapon was something I offered you. The children's hats were something they asked for themselves. Don't measure the value of things only by their price. Don't judge their nature by their cost." He spoke gently but deliberately. Because he would be returning to Middle-earth someday, he wanted to teach the three of them something. Rohan never lacked brave riders, he thought, but in the long view, it often lacked wise leadership. "Like aiding Gondor?" Hyojed asked after a moment, thoughtful. "Rohan has paid a great price already, but the heart of this is about upholding an ancient oath. Theoretically, yes." Eno nodded and then changed the subject. "Let me tell you a story about a charcoal seller." The tale of the charcoal seller was new in Middle-earth. It wasn't thrilling, but it painted the harsh daily reality of common folk, how a single careless decision by those in power could upend countless lives. Thin linen, straw sandals, chilblains on his feet, and yet the old man lamented that the weather wasn't cold enough. Eno finished, having abridged and smoothed the story until it took less than 5 minutes. "That's why I'm against aiding Gondor," Hyojed said at once. For 6 months along the western border, by the Eisen he'd seen too much suffering, tragedies paid for in blood and tears. We can't ask our people to pay more. "But Rohan can't bear the name of traitor," Eomer protested, helpless. Theoden's nephew, commander of the royal guard, who had been silent until now, argued that Rohan had no choice. Many counted on Gondor, dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, the elves of Rivendell, even the Sindar of Lothlorien. "Yes, I know that the dark forces will have other targets eventually," Hyojed snapped back. "But will everyone else stand unafraid while only Rohan trembles? Are we to use the lives of Rohan's people to buy peace for others? If we're going to die, we'll die together." Eowyn felt a sudden sadness. The scene she dreaded most had finally unfolded. Political differences driving a wedge between kin. Rationally, she understood Hyojed's point. Gondor was not some untouchable holy city, but a vast realm with depth and resources. Even if Mordor's legions came, it would take time to sweep across such lands, and if Rohan could hold its southern borders and the passes, its riders might yet find strength. But emotion and duty tangled in the room. The argument was as much about honor and oaths as about strategy. Eno did not pick a side. "You don't need to argue about what has already been decided. I understand, Theoden. Once he chooses, the two of you cannot change it. Instead of squabbling, think about how to deal with what comes." He rose and moved to a nearby suitcase. In a moment, he set a single-handed sword on the table, an alchemical blade from old Bands. It had been given as a gift, but it bore real enchantment, tough, sharp, and true. "This is what I promised," Eno said, placing the sword before Eowyn, "for you, the shield maiden of Rohan." 3 days after the Battle of Helm's Deep, a new sort of blacksmith shop opened in Edoras. It was different from the others, which were numerous and specialized. This shop ran with a single craftsman from start to finish. Flames rose as if by their own will, hammers struck with uncanny rhythm, and sword blanks turned themselves on the anvil. After giving Eowyn the alchemical weapon, Eno had kept his promise to Hyojed and then gone further. He had founded this workshop. He would not forge many alchemical blades in a short time, but well-made ordinary gear could be produced en masse. A magical duplication spell helped too. The duplicates might not last a year and a half, but knowing the course of history, that span was more than enough. When these items eventually faded, Middle-earth would be moving into a new era, the Fourth Age, when men would govern themselves. Inside the smithy, as a fresh spear was being shaped, Eno stopped and surveyed the room. Longswords, hand axes, flails, spears, longbows, round shields, and chainmail were laid out, ordinary arms, each refined by charm and craft so their quality rivaled that of dwarven smiths. When the samples were finished, Eno casually snuffed the forge's flames and looked up at a corner of the ceiling. "If you don't need them, I'll send these fellows to the battlefield," he said to the empty space. From a blue spiderweb in the corner came a dry voice. "What makes you think I need the protection of these insects?" A blue halo flared, and a tall figure unfolded into being. Familiar voice, familiar face, familiar garb. After many years, the White Witch had returned. But she was not the cold, majestic figure she had once been. Her features had softened. There was relief and gentleness where once there had been frost. "You succeeded?" Eno breathed. It was almost unbelievable. Seeing her now, Eno was astonished. She had truly reversed her form. When he had asked her to remain in the restricted section, he had half expected that, if she were ever trapped in a spider's form, she would try to change it. But he had not expected such a reversal so quickly. In merely a year, the White Witch had somehow managed it. Chapter 259, Lena's Departure. The blacksmith shop was a room of iron and fire, filled with weapons and gear. The White Witch's sudden arrival made the ordinary space feel extraordinary. People say fine clothes and jewels can beautify a person, but when a person is exceptional, they can in turn beautify everything around them. She was like a jewel herself. Her tall, arresting presence was emphasized by crystal high heels, at least 3 inches, that made her seem even more slender. A pale blue evening gown flowed around her. Her skin was white and luminous as porcelain. Against the newly forged weapons, the contrast of softness and hardness in the room was striking. "Am I supposed to look surprised?" the White Witch teased. "In a way, yes. This is unprecedented magic," Eno admitted. Transforming magical creatures into human form was unheard of. "What if it's like this?" another voice chimed from above. A small figure unspooled from blue spider silk on the ceiling and dropped down. Eno's eyes moved from the White Witch to Lena perched on the ceiling and then back again. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. "Do you remember that notebook I gave you? The Gaunt family's legacy notes. They used their own bodies in alchemy." The White Witch's reminder brought the old notebook to Eno's mind. Using oneself as raw material for alchemy, carving ancient runes into the flesh to gain greater power. "You remembered, but you didn't study it closely enough," she said. She walked slowly to the wall, her light steps making the skirt ripple like ocean waves. Lena dropped from the ceiling and settled on the White Witch's shoulder, the sight both absurd and oddly beautiful. "Is this body an alchemy construct? An ice flower creation?" Eno asked, half in a trance. If not for etiquette, he would have wanted to examine it up close. This was miraculous. The White Witch understood. She extended her hand, and after a moment, the fair skin of her palm seemed to recede, revealing a crystalline ice flower set among intricate alchemical circuits. "I had you read that book because I wanted you to consider ice flower magic," she said. "And what did you do? You made a troll and 5 goblins, then had them cultivate the valley." She sighed softly and glanced toward the blacksmith's furnace. The flames had died down, but the heat still lingered in the bricks. "But that's all in the past. You've forged your own path. There's no need to follow mine. Time has a way of slipping by unnoticed." The Battle of Helm's Deep had been over for more than 2 weeks, and much had happened since. Adoras was regaining its old vitality. Under Eowyn's careful management, more than 5,000 Rohan survivors were now integrated into the city and beginning new lives. Hyojet and Eomer were not idle either. Each commanded well-equipped cavalry and used Adoras as their base, sweeping the remaining dark forces from Rohan to make the land safer. To Eno, these were small changes. His focus remained on modifying the Acromantula. With Lena gone, his attention had only sharpened. The story of Middle-earth was entering its final movement, and all that remained was to wait for its last act. Lena's departure had been unexpected in one way. She didn't leave for a distant court or a strange land. With Fide's help, she had gone to the Shire. Having been a queen for so long, she said, she wanted the experience of living under another identity. Eno understood, and even if he had not, he wouldn't have objected. He had promised her freedom and would not interfere with her choice. When she left, he felt a subtle relief, like the easing of a long-held burden finally lifted. But actions speak louder than intentions. The White Witch's death, the appearance of the ice flower, Lena's blue acromantula form, when a string of coincidences accumulates, everything must be reconsidered. Were they truly coincidences? One can ponder, but should avoid over-speculating about people's motives. Lena's warning last year, asking him to pay attention to the ice flower in the sanctuary, had already set things in motion. She truly paid a reward, and it was generous. The ice flower, magic legacy, and the bloodline were real. It was only that one flower that was a fabrication, a contingency the White Witch had prepared. From Charn to Narnia, as an experienced transmigrant, the White Witch knew how to smuggle things across worlds, but she had not accounted for the sanctuary's rules. Once the seed left Narnia, events became irreversible. That realization left Eno with guilt, especially after understanding that the White Witch had not acted with malice. Even when a bargain fails, goodwill can remain. He had accepted her legacy and bloodline, yet in the end he had outmaneuvered her, and that felt petty. So after Lena appeared, Eno did his best to show her respect and never forced her to do anything. As she said, "It's all past now," the White Witch had observed. After Middle-earth's story ends, we'll probably meet like old friends every few decades. Debts of gratitude are the hardest to settle, Eno murmured, then buried himself in new work. Before him sprawled hundreds of acromantula, each over 3 meters long, each carrying huge spears on their backs. Far to the west, in Gondor's capital region, the first peak west of Minas Tirith, Silent Hill, loomed above the eastern edge of the Druadan forest. Here stood the beacon tower Gondor used to summon aid from Rohan. On this day, the peak welcomed 2 figures, a tall gray wizard and a small, determined hobbit. "I'll draw them off," Gandalf said as they climbed, lowering his voice. "The rest is up to you." "Don't worry, I can do it," Pippin replied earnestly. Gandalf pretended to be an injured old man to attract the attention of the soldiers guarding the beacon. While they rushed to him, Pippin darted up the ancient tower of Amon Din with hobbit agility. He toppled the oil lamp that fed the beacon. Scalding oil and flame splashed down. The dry tinder caught instantly. The beacon of Amon Din was lit. The ancient bond between Rohan and Gondor from ages past flared back to life. One beacon after another, the second, the third, the fourth, ignited along the snow-lined spine of the White Mountains, sending a clear signal westward for aid. Saturday noon, dragged to a meeting again. I'm exhausted. Only 2 updates today. Sorry, everyone. I plan to end the grand movement of Middle-earth tomorrow. Chapter 260, Cursed Ghost of Mount Erech. The border between Rohan and Gondor, on the towering western spur of the White Mountains. The last of Gondor's 7 beacon towers, Halathirion, flared to life. Ding, ding, ding. In Edoras, the gathering bell rang through the High Council Hall. Theoden stood dressed for war, waiting. When all had assembled, he spoke without hesitation. "They have lit the beacon for aid. I will honor the old oath and lead 5,000 riders of Rohan to reinforce Gondor. Éomer will be my second in command and march with me. If I fall, he will assume supreme command of the cavalry." Theoden's gaze swept over the assembled, familiar faces of Rohan's leaders. Then he added, "Hyojid, take 1,000 men and remain in Edoras to guard against a possible Dunlending counterattack to the west. This is the command of the King of Rohan." This time there was no despair, no blinding hatred for the shadow. Theoden had to justify leaving enough strength behind to ensure Rohan's survival. The order to march spread quickly. The people of Rohan packed quietly and bid final farewells. At Edoras' gate, a long table stood, laden with weapons and armor, spears, barrels of arrows, chainmail, round shields, and light helmets. Eno stood beside it as families and friends came to see off their loved ones. It was Rohan's last rite before battle. Each rider would choose his own arms. When the first soldier passed the gate, he took one of the fine pieces. No further orders were needed. Every man who reached the table found equipment that suited him. It was a small miracle, much like the day food had been handed out 6 months before. The table seemed to hold only a few items, yet no matter how many took them, the supply never diminished under the eyes of all Rohan. Across the plains, 5,000 well-equipped cavalry thundered south. Though not a massive force, their charge made the grass tremble like 1,000 hooves. Theoden had chosen a bold plan. 1 man, 2 horses, ride hard and fast, rest briefly at Moria Creek, then push on to Minas Tirith. Eno rode above them on his flying broom. He intended to fight with as much freedom as prudence allowed. Unlike during Helm's Deep, he would not be tied down by caution alone. This campaign had purpose beyond the battlefield. Frodo's quest continued to shape everything. One line plain and another secret. The overt attack on Mordor drew Sauron's eye. The hidden line was destruction of the ring. Aragorn knew the odds and went willingly to be seen. Eno, as a human wizard, had more freedom than the Maiar. He moved under the great music, trying to help humanity rise. 2 days and nights of riding brought them to the southern edge of the White Mountains at dusk, Moria Creek. Scouts found the passes clear, and Theoden ordered camp. Moria Creek lay only half a day's ride from Minas Tirith. Eno alighted from his broom and sat alone on a rock, not seeking out Theoden or Aragorn. The camp was noisy with men and horses, bristling with the nervous energy of fighters who knew tomorrow might be their last day. From his case, Eno took out an old instrument he had not played in years, a small Scottish accordion, the first music he had ever owned in the magical world. The memories came back in sharp color. Buying it, old John's coins, goblins at Gringotts who had tricked him, the astonished shopkeeper who mixed ink into the bargain. At dusk, he played without any spell work, letting the mournful, bellows-driven notes drift over the camp. The sound carried like wind over hills. Slowly the camp stilled. Restless horses ceased pawing. Men listened as if transported, seeing rolling mountains, tartans, tiny moss flowers, and the sight of Scots falling in bloody defiance. The melody held sorrow and grandeur both, a human longing for freedom, an epic born of blood and tears. When the last note faded, Theoden had come to the rock. With him were Eomer, Aragorn, and Prince Legolas. "Does it have a name?" Theoden asked. "Braveheart," Eno answered, and set the accordion gently down. He felt then, with a new clarity, the sweep of Middle-earth's story. The way time is a song, and only the deeds of heroes are surely sung forward through the ages. Every man dies, he thought, but not every man truly lives. Night fell, and the camp slept under a remarkably quiet sky. Eno felt the change, and could not explain it by his tune alone. Then joy touched his mind, Feda's joy, and he looked south of the White Mountains with a jolt. The cursed dead of Erech. He remembered the fleeting, uncanny army of the dead that had appeared in the tales and then gone. The people of the valleys, kindred to the wild men, had been driven low by darkness. Only after Sauron was pushed back in the Second Age did they rise enough to make oath to Númenor's heirs. At the founding of Gondor, they swore allegiance on the black stone to Isildur. But in the stories they later proved faithless and refused a summons. Isildur, in wrath, pronounced a curse at the stone. "You shall be the last king. This war will be drawn out, and when the dust is not yet settled, you shall be called again." That long shame, buried for 3,000 years, was the secret that helped decide Theoden's course. Gondor had no king now, but Amon-Din's beacon was lit. Standing on the White Mountains, Theoden, king of Rohan, could not gamble with honor or with the fate of his people. He dared not refuse the call.